in a city where power is measured in secrets and blood. Aleandro, the ghost Bellini, was a god. No one could touch him, no one could find him, and no one could kill him until they did. A silent poison crept through his veins, a phantom illness that baffled the world's best doctors, leaving the untouchable Mafia boss a prisoner in his own decaying body. His empire crumbled, his enemies circled, and his men watched helplessly as he faded. They said no one could save him. They were wrong. A brave single mum with a hidden past was about to walk into the lion's den and with a single touch change everything. The scent of antiseptic and expensive linen could not mask the smell of decay. It wasn't the scent of a wound or a sickness. It was the smell of power rotting from the inside out. Aleandro Bellini, the head of the city's most formidable crime syndicate, lay still in a bed that cost more than the average family car. His private suite at St. Jude's Medical Center was more fortress than hospital room, with two of his most trusted men, silent and stoic, standing guard outside the reinforced door. Inside, the only sounds were the quiet hum of a cardiac monitor and the shallow, rasping breaths of the man in the bed. Aleandro, known on the street as the Ghost for his uncanny ability to appear and disappear without a trace, had been reduced to a specter of a different kind. His once formidable frame was gaunt, the sharp lines of his jaw and cheekbones now skeletal. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath his closed eyes, and his olive skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality. For 3 months he had been like this. It started subtly, a tremor in his hand, a wave of fatigue. He'd ignored it, attributing it to stress. But the weakness grew a relentless tide pulling him under. Soon he couldn't hold a pen, then a glass. Now he could barely lift his head. The finest doctors from across the globe had been flown in their consultations held in hushed, fearful tones. They ran every test imaginable, their multi-million-dollar machines scanning and probing a body that was shutting down for no discernible reason. Their conclusion was unanimous and infuriating. There was nothing wrong with him. No tumor, no virus, no known disease. Yet he was dying. Marco Vittori Alessandro's consigliere and closest friend since childhood stood by the window staring out at the rain-sullied city below. He saw not the glittering lights of the metropolis, but the circling vultures. Dante Falcone, the ruthless head of their rival family, was growing bolder. Shipments were being hit, territories encroached upon. Falcone knew Alessandro was out of commission. The entire underworld was whispering about it. Without the Ghost at the helm, the Bellini Empire was vulnerable, a wounded beast surrounded by a pack of hungry wolves. Any change? Marco asked, his voice low and growly, not turning from the window. Dr. Evans, a world-renowned neurologist who had been practically kidnapped and paid a king's ransom to oversee Alessandro's care, shook his head. He adjusted his glasses, his face a mask of professional frustration. His vitals are stable but declining. It's a slow, systematic failure. His neurological functions are degrading. It's like watching a candle burn down. I've never seen anything like it. It's poison. Marco stated it wasn't a question. We've run every toxicology screen in existence, Marco. Dr. Evans stayed running a hand through his thinning hair. Standard panels, experimental arrays even sent samples to a specialized lab in Germany. Nothing. If it's a poison, it's one that science hasn't discovered yet. It leaves no trace. It's a ghost, just like him. Marco's hands clenched into fists. He knew it was Falcone. It had to be. The man was known for his sadistic creativity. This slow, untraceable execution was his style. A public assassination was messy, But this was a masterpiece of cruelty designed to dismantle not just the man, but his legacy, his entire organization piece by painful piece. A soft knock came at the door. One of the guards, a mountain of a man named Nico, opened it a crack. He spoke to someone in a hushed voice before looking at Marco. "It's the night nurse from the agency for the late shift." Marco waved a dismissive hand. They'd been through a dozen agency nurses. They came. They saw the armed guards and the grim atmosphere, and they usually didn't last more than a few shifts. They were just there to perform the basic tasks the private doctors deemed beneath them. Changing IV bags, monitoring the machines, turning the patient to prevent bed sores. It was a grim, silent job. "Send her in," Marco grumbled, turning his attention back to the dying man in the bed. He felt a familiar surge of helpless fury. He who had taken bullets for Aleandro, who had dismantled rival crews with ruthless efficiency, could do nothing but watch his friend, his brother, evaporate before his eyes. The door opened and a woman walked in. She was unassuming, dressed in simple blue scrubs, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat, functional bun. She carried a small, worn satchel over her shoulder and moved with a quiet efficiency that was different from the nervous energy of the previous nurses. She didn't startle at the sight of the room's grim occupant or the palpable tension. She simply walked to the foot of the bed, picked up the chart, and began to read. Marco barely gave her a second glance. She was just another temp, another face in the long, frustrating parade of failures. He had a war to fight, and he was losing his king. What good could a simple nurse do? He had no idea that the woman who had just walked into the room held the one and only key to saving them all. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and her past held a secret far deadlier than any poison. Evelyn Reed knew how to be invisible. It was a skill she had perfected over the past 5 years, a necessary camouflage for a life lived in the shadows. She kept her head down, her voice soft, her presence minimal. Invisibility was safety. It was how she protected her son Leo. As she reviewed Aleandro Bellini's chart, her professional training took over. A ghost of a life she'd been forced to leave behind. The page was a litany of negatives. Toxin screens, clear. Pathogen tests, negative. MRI, CT scans. Petty scans, all normal. The official diagnosis was a string of medical jargon that amounted to a shrug. Idiopathic neurodegenerative decline. Idiopathic. The doctor's word for "we have no idea." But Evelyn saw something else. It was in the details. The nurse's notes tucked in the back of the chart. Patient exhibits intermittent episodes of muscle fasciculation, primarily in the extremities. A faint, sweet, almost almond-like odor noted on breath during exhalation. Skin has a persistent, low-grade clamminess, unresponsive to temperature changes. To the doctors, these were disconnected symptoms of an unknown ailment. To Evelyn, they were a constellation of stars pointing to a single, horrifying point in her past. A cold dread, heavy and familiar, settled in her stomach. She forced it down her face, remaining impassive as she walked over to the IV stand. Her hands were steady as she checked the drip rate her movements practiced and sure, her real life. The one before she was a single mom working night shifts for a nursing agency was a world away. Dr. Evelyn Reed, with a PhD in Botany and toxicology from Johns Hopkins, she had been a rising star in ethnobotany, specializing in the complex chemical compounds of rare and undiscovered plant species. Her husband, David, had been a brilliant biochemist. Together, they worked for a major pharmaceutical corporation, a company that promised to cure the world but was more interested in patenting its poisons. David had discovered something, a compound derived from the wolfsbane family Atum lictum, but modified with a synthetic peptide that made it bond to nerve endings. It caused a slow, agonizing paralysis that was undetectable by conventional means. It mimicked natural cell death. He called it senti or tiem silent death. When he realized the company planned to sell it to paramilitary contractors, he tried to blow the whistle. That was 5 years ago. The official story was a car accident, a drunk driver. Evelyn knew better. She was left with a 6-month-old Leo and a life shattered. They had taken everything from her husband, her research, her career. They discredited her, buried her under a mountain of litigation and threats until she'd vanished, changing her name and becoming just another face in the crowd. Now, standing in the silent room of a dying mafia boss, her past had come roaring back. The almond scent on the breath, the muscle twitches, the slow shutdown. It was David's poison. She was sure of it. After settling into the routine of the room, checking monitors and making notes, she waited. Marco and the doctor eventually left, leaving her alone with the 2 guards outside and the man in the bed. With the room now quiet, she moved closer to Aleandro. Even in this wasted state, there was an aura of power about him, an intensity that seemed to cling to the very air he breathed. She leaned in, pretending to adjust his pillow. The faint, sweet scent was there just as the notes described. It was the signature of the synthetic peptide. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This man, this dangerous criminal, was the victim of the same evil that had destroyed her life. Her mind raced the antidote. David had been working on one. It was complex, derived from a rare orchid, the Dendrolax lindeni, the ghost orchid. The irony was almost cruel. The orchid extract needed to be stabilized by a specific enzyme, one that was notoriously difficult to synthesize. David had a breakthrough just before he died, but his research notes were gone, confiscated by the corporation. But Evelyn hadn't trusted them. She had her own copies encrypted and hidden on a drive she hadn't dared to access in 5 years. And she had one other thing. Before David died, he'd given her a small vial, a prototype of the stabilizer. He'd told her it was the most important thing he'd ever created. She had kept it with her, always a memento of a stolen future, tucked away in a small, fireproof safe in her tiny apartment. It was only a small dose. Not a cure, but it might be enough to halt the poison's progression. A choice stood before her, stark and terrifying. She could walk away, maintain her invisibility, keep Leo safe. Tending to this man was a job, nothing more. Getting involved with the Mafia was a death sentence, or she could fight back. She looked at Aleandro Bellini's still face. Saving him wasn't just about saving a stranger. It was about justice for David. It was about proving that the monsters who created this poison couldn't win. They had taken her husband. They had taken her life. She would not let them take another. Her decision made a calm resolve settled over her. She finished her shift without incident, her demeanor as bland and professional as ever. But as she walked out into the pre-dawn chill of the city, Evelyn Reed was no longer invisible. She was a scientist, a widow, and a woman on the edge of a war she never wanted to fight. She went home, kissed her sleeping eye, and for the first time in 5 years, she opened the safe. The next evening, Evelyn returned to the hospital not just with her satchel, but with a small, insulated vial tucked securely in an inner pocket of her scrubs. It felt like a block of ice against her skin, a chilling reminder of the gamble she was about to take. Her plan was desperate, reckless, and could get her and her son killed in a dozen different ways. She found Marco Vittori in the hallway outside Alessandro's room, his face etched with a deeper exhaustion than the night before. He was on the phone, his voice a low, angry snarl. I don't care what it takes. Find the leak. Find who's talking to Falcone. Rip this organization apart until you find them. He hung up, pinching the bridge of his nose, his eyes closed. This was her moment. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn stepped in front of him. Mr. Vittori. He opened his eyes, his gaze cold and dismissive. He didn't recognize her. What? I know what's wrong with him, she said, her voice quiet but firm, not a trace of fear in it. I know what's killing Aleandro Bellini. Marco stared at her, a flicker of disbelief, followed by irritation. We have the best doctors in the world on this. What could a night nurse possibly know? They're looking for a disease. They should be looking for a specifically engineered neurotoxin, one derived from the anitum family bound with a synthetic peptide that makes it untraceable to standard mass spectrometry. Evelyn stated the scientific terms, rolling off her tongue with an authority that made Marco pause. It's called silent mortem. His eyes narrowed. The name meant nothing to him, but the conviction in her voice was undeniable. How do you know this? Because my husband discovered it, and the people who made it killed him to cover it up, she said, her voice dropping thick with a pain she rarely allowed herself to feel. I recognized the symptoms, the scent on his breath, the specific pattern of neurological decay. I am probably the only person on this planet who can identify it, and the only one who knows how to stop it. Marco's suspicion wared with a desperate sliver of hope. She could be a plant from a rival, a lunatic, or a godsend. His gut, the instinct that had kept him alive on the streets for 2 decades, told him to listen. Stop it. The doctors said nothing can be done. The doctors are wrong, Evelyn replied. The full antidote requires the extract of a rare orchid which needs to be sourced, and an enzyme I would need a proper lab to synthesize. It will take time, but I have a stabilizing agent with me, a small dose. It won't cure him, but it will halt the poison's progression. It will stop the decay. It will bring him back. She saw the conflict in his face. To let this unknown woman inject his boss with a mysterious substance was insane, but to do nothing was to condemn him to death. Prove it, Marco said, his voice a low growl. Evelyn nodded. Get Dr. Evans and bring a blood gas analyzer. After I administer the agent, his blood oxygen saturation will rise dramatically within minutes, and his brainwave activity will shift from delta to theta patterns. You will see a physical change. His mind will clear. The challenge hung in the air. Marco studied her for a long, tense minute, searching her face for any sign of deception. He saw none. He saw only a steely resolve that mirrored his own. With a curt nod, he pulled out his phone and summoned the doctor. Minutes later, the room was a hive of quiet tension. Dr. Evans stood by, looking skeptical and alarmed. Marco and his 2 guards watched Evelyn's every move. She calmly prepped a syringe, drawing up the clear liquid from the vial she had brought. Her hands didn't shake. She approached the bed, her focus entirely on Aleandro. She found the port in his IV line and spoke softly as if to him. This is going to work. You're going to be all right. She injected the fluid into the line, her movement swift and precise. For a moment, nothing happened. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Dr. Evans crossed his arms, a cynical look on his face. Marco's jaw was tight enough to crack stone. Then it began. The beeping of the cardiac monitor, which had been slow and steady, began to quicken, strengthening into a robust rhythm. The number on the pulse oximeter, which had hovered at a dangerously low 89, began to climb. 90, 92, 95, 98. A collective gasp went through the room. Aleandro's shallow breaths deepened. A shudder ran through his body, and then for the first time in 3 months, his eyelids fluttered open. His eyes, a deep, piercing shade of gray, were cloudy at first, then slowly focused. They scanned the room, taking in the doctor, the guards, and finally settling on Marco. Marco. The voice was a dry, weak whisper, but it was his. It was the voice of their leader. Their king pulled back from the brink. Marco rushed to the bedside, his composure finally breaking. "Boss Alessandro, can you hear me?" Alessandro's gaze shifted, moving past Marco to the woman standing quietly by the IV stand, his eyes now startlingly clear, locked with hers. He didn't know who she was, but he understood in that instant that she was the reason he could see the reason he could think the reason the fog had lifted from his mind. Evelyn met his gaze, her heart pounding. She had just declared war on a powerful corporation and thrown her lot in with the city's most dangerous men. She had won the first battle, but looking into the ghost's intelligent, calculating eyes, she knew the real fight was just beginning. The fog in Aleandro's mind had receded, replaced by a crystalline, razor-sharp clarity. His body was still a prison, weak and unresponsive, but his mind, his greatest asset, was free. He lay still, listening as Marco and a stunned Derevan spoke in urgent, hushed tones just outside his room. He absorbed every word, piecing together the events of the last few hours. A woman, a nurse named Evelyn Reed. She claimed to know the poison, claimed her husband was its creator and victim, and claimed she alone could brew the cure. She had injected him with a stabilizer, and it had worked, a miracle. When Marco re-entered the room alone, he found Aleandro's eyes open and fixed on him. "Tell me everything," Alessandro commanded. His voice was still weak, a pale imitation of its former power, but the authority was unmistakable. Marco did recounting his conversation with Evelyn, her claims about the poison senti, her husband's death, and her demand for resources to create a full antidote. She wants a full biochemical lab. Marco finished access to the Jensen pharmaceutical database. She says they're the ones who killed her husband and stole his research. And she wants protection for herself and her son. Alessandra processed this. The audacity of it was breathtaking. This unknown woman had walked into his life, holding his very existence in her hands, and was now making demands. He was a man who took, who commanded, who never asked. Now his life depended on the knowledge locked inside this woman's head. Her son. Aleandro asked, the words raspy. "Leia, he's 6, Marco said. The mention of a child gave him pause. It added a layer of complexity to the situation. A woman with a child was either more desperate or more dangerous, or both. She is a vulnerability. Falcone, if he knows she's the cure. He doesn't. No one does, Marco said quickly. We've locked this floor down. No one in or out without my approval. She's due back for her shift in an hour. Bring her to me, Alessandro ordered alone. When Evelyn walked into the room an hour later, the atmosphere had changed. The oppressive scent of sickness had lessened, replaced by the electric hum of lethal intensity. Alessandro was propped up slightly by the pillows, and though he was physically frail, his gaze was like a physical weight pinning her in place. The ghost was awake. You are Evelyn Reed, he stated. I am, she said, her voice steady. She would not show fear. He would respect strength, not weakness. You claim you can save my life. I can, but my services come at a price. A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps respect, passed through his eyes. Marco told me your terms. A lab, protection, access to Jensen Pharmaceuticals' encrypted servers. He paused, his gaze dissecting her. It is a bold request from someone in your position. My position is the only one of any value in this room, Evelyn countered coolly. You are the most powerful man in this city, and you were dying from a poison no one could name. I named it. I stopped it. My position is one of absolute strength. Your life is in my hands, Mr. Bellini. I suggest you remember that." Silence stretched between them thick and heavy. Alessandro had not been spoken to this way in decades. Men who valued their lives tiptoed around him with deference and fear. This woman, with her clear eyes and unshakable nerve, met his gaze without flinching. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "You will have your lab. We have a facility. Clean off the books. State of the art. My tech team is the best in the world. They will crack Jensen's servers. You and your son will be moved to a secure location. My men will guard you with their lives. You will have everything you need." "Good," Evelyn said. But he added, his voice dropping. "If you are lying to me, if this is a trick, a long con for the Falcone family, know this. There is no corner of this earth you could hide in. I will find you, and what my poisoner has done to me will seem like a gentle mercy compared to what I will do to you and anyone you have ever cared about." The threat was not delivered with anger, but with a chilling, factual certainty. It was a promise. "I'm not working for your enemies," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "My enemy is the same as yours, the people who created this poison. I want justice for my husband. You want to live. Our goals are aligned. For now," he conceded, "you will begin work immediately. Marco will arrange everything. You will report your progress directly to me, no one else." Their alliance was forged, a fragile pact born of mutual desperation. Evelyn left the room feeling as though she had just negotiated a treaty with a foreign king. She had the resources she needed, but she had also just shackled herself and her son to the most dangerous man in the city. Later that night, as two of Aleandro's men, Nico and a quieter man named Matteo, moved her and a sleeping Leo from their small apartment to a luxurious, heavily fortified penthouse, the reality of her choice set in. From the penthouse window, the city glittered below like a web of jewels. It was beautiful and treacherous. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the heart of the web, and its spider was watching her every move. The laboratory was more advanced than anything Evelyn had ever worked in, housed in the sub of an unassuming Bellini-owned warehouse. It was a sterile, state-of-the-art facility. Aleandro's tech team, a group of young geniuses poached from various three-letter agencies, had, as promised, cracked Jensen pharmaceutical servers. Decades of encrypted data research and internal communications were now at her fingertips. For days, Evelyn worked relentlessly, fueled by coffee and a burning need for vengeance. She cross-referenced David's hidden notes with Jensen's files, painstakingly reverse engineering the poisoned synthetic peptide. The work was consuming a bitter reunion with the life that had been stolen from her. She found David's project files. His name officially redacted, his contributions credited to his former boss, a ruthless executive named Dr. Alistair Finch. She saw the internal memos silencing David's ethical concerns, the veiled threats, and finally, the fabricated report on his accidental death. It was all there, cold, corporate, and monstrous. Meanwhile, Leo was adjusting to his new life with the innocent adaptability of a child. He thought they were on a special vacation. The penthouse was a palace, and his new bodyguards, Nikiko and Matteo, were stoic giants who indulged his every whim, transforming from lethal enforcers to surprisingly gentle playmates. Alessandra, still confined to his hospital bed, but growing stronger each day, called Evelyn every evening for a progress report. Their conversations were terse and professional, but a strange intimacy began to develop between them. He was a captive audience, and she was the only person who understood the science of his ailment. She found herself explaining the complex biochemistry to him, and he listened with a sharp, insightful intelligence, asking questions that revealed a deep understanding of strategy and systems. He learned about her past not through interrogation, but through the context of her work. He heard the catch in her voice when she mentioned David's name, the cold fury when she described Alistair Finch. He, a man who dealt in secrets, began to understand the woman who held his life in her hands. She was not just a scientist. She was a survivor, forged in a fire of betrayal that mirrored his own world. One afternoon, as Matteo was taking Leo to the park in the armored sedan, Evelyn felt a sudden prickling sense of unease. She called Matteo's phone. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She immediately called the secure line to Aleandro's room. Marco answered. "It's Leo," she said, her voice tight with fear. "I can't reach Matteo. They went to Central Park an hour ago." The response was immediate and terrifyingly efficient. Marco's voice became steel. "Stay in the lab. Lock it down. I'm handling it." To Aleandro, the attack on Evelyn's son was an unacceptable breach and a personal insult. It was a move Dante Falcone would make targeting a child to gain leverage. He gave a single chilling order to Marco. "Find them. Bring the boy back. Leave no one standing." The next 2 hours were the longest of Evelyn's life. She paced the lab, her mind a maelstrom of horrific possibilities. She had done this. She had put her son in the crosshairs of a mafia war. Finally, the lab door opened. Marco stood there, his suit jacket gone, a dark stain on his white shirt sleeve. Behind him, Nico entered carrying a sleeping Leo in his arms. The boy was unharmed, clutching a half-eaten bag of popcorn. "He's fine," Marco said, his voice grim. "Falcone's men. They tried to grab him. Matteo is in our clinic. He'll live." Relief washed over Evelyn so intensely her knees buckled. She rushed to her son, her hands stroking his hair, his face assuring herself he was real and safe. After tucking him into his bed in the penthouse, she returned to find Marco waiting for her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. "We protect our own," he said simply. The implication was clear. She and Leo were now considered theirs. That night, when Aleandro called, his voice was different. The professional distance was gone, replaced by a low, simmering rage. "They will not touch your son again," he said. "It was not a reassurance. It was a vow. Falcone has crossed a line. He will pay for it." "This is my fault," Evelyn said, her voice cracking. "I brought this into his life." "No." Aleandro's voice was firm. "This world was waiting for you long before you knew it. The men who killed your husband and the men who came for your son are two sides of the same coin. They prey on the weak. They underestimate those they cannot control." He paused. "You are not weak, Evelyn. And I am no longer dying." In that moment, something shifted between them. The fragile alliance of necessity was being forged into something stronger. He was not just her patient, and she was not just his cure. She was a woman who understood his world of calculated risks and hidden enemies, and he was the one man powerful enough to help her fight them. The scars of her past had led her to him, and now their futures were irrevocably intertwined. She had saved his life, and now he would save hers. With the formula for the antidote nearly complete, only one obstacle remained. The final crucial ingredient was a specific culture of the Dendrolax lindini orchid, one that had been genetically modified by David's team to maximize its enzymatic output. According to Jensen's records, the only existing sample was stored in a cryovault at a private high-security conservatory Jensen used for its most sensitive botanical assets. It was called the Eden Conservatory. Breaking into Eden was a task for Alessandro's people. The plan was meticulous. His tech team would disable the security grid for a 7-minute window. A 3-man team led by Nico would go in, retrieve the sample, and get out. Evelyn provided them with the exact vault number and handling protocols. The night of the operation, the penthouse was a command center. Evelyn and Marco stood over a bank of monitors displaying blueprints and security feeds. Aleandro was on a live, secure audio link from his hospital room, his mind sharp and his questions precise, directing the operation like a general from his tent. "Team is in position." Marco reported, his eyes fixed on a schematic. "Techs are a go. Disabling the grid in 3, 2, 1. On the screen, a series of green lights turned red. "Grid is down." A voice crackled over the comms. "You have 7 minutes. Go." They watched a live feed from Nico's helmet cam. The team moved with silent, fluid grace through darkened corridors lined with exotic plants. They reached the cryo vault without incident. Nico entered the code Evelyn had recovered from the archives. The heavy door hissed open. Then everything went wrong. The moment the door opened, emergency lights flashed red, and a deafening alarm blared. On the monitor, Marco cursed. "It's a trap!" The grid came back online. It's a silent tripwire inside the vault. On the helmet cam, the world devolved into chaos. Men in black tactical gear swarmed the corridor. Gunfire erupted. The feed cut out. "Nico report." Marco yelled into his comms. There was only static. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. This was her fault, her information. Aleandro's voice came over the speaker, devoid of panic, cold as ice. "Falcone knew we were coming. He knew where and when. There is a leak, not just a whisper, a river. The only people who knew the exact time and location of the operation were on this command team. Marco, Evelyn, the tech team in another location, and Aleandro himself. The implication was sickening. The traitor was in their inner circle." Suddenly, Alessandro spoke again, his voice dangerously soft. "Evelyn, the orchids. Tell me about them." "What?" she asked, confused by the non sequitur, the modified culture. "What are its properties?" It's extremely sensitive to temperature changes," she stammered, trying to follow his logic. "That's why it's in cryo storage. A sudden shift in temperature would render the enzymes inert within minutes. So, to set a trap, the enemy would have to know we were coming," Aleandro mused. "But to preserve the prize, they would have to keep the cryo systems running. But the silent alarm that was tripped, it was tied to the vault door, not the main grid." He paused. "That alarm code was not in the Jensen files, was it?" No. Evelyn realized with a jolt. It must have been added recently. Only someone with high-level access at Jensen could have done that. Or someone who was given the code by a traitor, Aleandro finished. His next word sent a chill down Marco's spine. "Who else is in my family, Marco? Who has ambition, but not the stomach for a direct challenge? Who has always felt they deserved more?" Marco's face went pale as the realization dawned on him. Luca Bellini, Alessandro's younger cousin, a man who managed the legitimate side of the family's finances, always smiling, always differential, but with a bitterness in his eyes. He has connections to Jensen's board through a shell corporation, Marco said, his voice laced with disgust. "We thought it was good for business. He sold us to Falcone for a seat at the head of the table." Aleandro snarled, and then his voice sharpened. "Where is Luca now?" A quick track of Luca's phone showed he was at the family's central warehouse, the same building that housed Evelyn's lab in the sub. "He's going for the research," Evelyn gasped. "He's going to destroy everything." "No," Aleandro corrected her. He's not there to destroy it. He's there to get you. You're the only one who can make the antidote. Falcone doesn't want the recipe. He wants the chef. Marco was already moving, grabbing a weapon from a hidden cache in the wall. I'm on my way. It's too late. He's already there. Aleandro said, his voice was grim. Evelyn, listen to me. The lab's ventilation system. Is it isolated? Yes, she said, her heart hammering. In your research, did David create anything else? Anything defensive? Evelyn's mind raced. Yes, there was one. A non-lethal neuroparalytic agent, a fine aerosol that could be dispersed through an air system, tasteless oddless. It was designed for containment. Yes, a powdered agent. It can be introduced into the ventilation intake. It would incapacitate anyone in the lab in less than a minute. Marco Alessandro commanded, "Get your men to seal that building. No one gets out. Evelyn, you know what you have to do." The hunter was now the hunted. Evelyn raced from the penthouse, Marco's men forming a protective phalanx around her as they descended to the lab. The betrayal was a venom as potent as the one that had nearly killed Alessandro. And now it was up to Evelyn to administer the antidote. The elevator doors opened to the sub, revealing a scene of quiet violence. 2 of the lab's guards lay unconscious on the floor, felled by tasers. The lab door itself was open. Luca Bellini stood inside his back to the door, rifling through Evelyn's research notes. 2 of Falcone's thugs stood with him, their guns trained on the entrance. Luca looked up, a smug, triumphant smile on his face as he saw Evelyn flanked by Marco. Cousin Alessandro sends his regards, I assume. He sneered at Marco. Too bad he's too weak to deliver them himself. Don't worry, I'll take good care of the family business, and Dr. Reed here will ensure I stay healthy. It's over, Luca. Marco growled, his own weapon raised. It was a standoff. It's just beginning, Luca countered. He gestured with his gun toward Evelyn. Come now, Doctor. We have work to do. Dante Falcone is very eager to meet you. But Evelyn wasn't looking at Luca. Her gaze was fixed on the environmental control panel on the far wall. She needed to get to it. She needed a diversion. You're a fool, Luca, she said, her voice ringing with contempt. You think Falcone will share power with you. He's using you. Once he has the antidote, once he has me, you're a loose end. Luca's smile faltered. She's bluffing. Am I? Evelyn took a small step forward. The full antidote requires more than just the orchid. It needs a specific blood protein as a binding agent, a protein that is unique to Alessandro's genetic line, to the Bellini bloodline. It was a brilliant, instantaneous lie, but it was plausible enough to sow a seed of doubt. Luca's eyes widened slightly. If the cure was tied to Bellini blood, then keeping Alessandro alive, or at least his bloodline, was paramount. Killing him would be suicide. My blood is Bellini blood, Luca said. A new avarice in his eyes. The antidote would make him truly invincible. In that moment of hesitation, Marco acted. He fired not at Luca, but at a metal shelving unit to his left. The crash of vials and equipment was the perfect distraction. As Luca and his men flinched, Evelyn sprinted. She didn't run for the exit. She ran straight into the lab, diving behind a reinforced steel workbench. As bullets whizzed past her head, she crawled frantically towards the ventilation intake, pulling the small canister of paralytic agent from her pocket. With trembling hands, she activated it and shoved it into the air duct. "Seal the door!" she screamed at Marco. He understood immediately, slamming the emergency lockdown button. A heavy steel door slid shut, trapping everyone, Evelyn, Luca, and his men inside. A soft hiss emanated from the ceiling vents. "What did you do?" Luca shrieked, his composure shattering. "Checkmate!" Evelyn breathed. One of Falcone's men swayed on his feet, his gun clattering to the floor. The other collapsed a moment later. Luca looked around in panic, his limbs growing heavy, his vision blurring. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his eyes wide with disbelief as he looked at the woman he had so fatally underestimated. He collapsed before he could utter another word. When Marco and his men finally breached the door minutes later, they found Evelyn standing amidst the sleeping bodies, the air already clearing. She was breathing heavily, but she was unharmed. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Nico and his team had been recovered wounded but alive. Luca's betrayal sent a shock wave through the organization, but Alessandro, his voice now strong over the phone, used it to consolidate his power, purging anyone with loyalty to his cousin. Dante Falcone, deprived of both the cure and his inside man, was left exposed. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned irrevocably. A week later, Evelyn administered the final dose of the completed antidote to Alessandro. He was out of the hospital back in his penthouse fortress, his strength returning with astounding speed. He stood by the vast window looking out over his city. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, and while still lean, the ghost was gone, replaced by the king. Evelyn stood a few feet away, watching him. "It's done," she said quietly. "You'll make a full recovery." He turned to face her. The sheer force of his presence was still something she was getting used to. "We are done," he corrected her. "You avenged your husband. Alistair Finch and the board of Jensen have had a series of unfortunate accidents. The company is in chaos. Their secrets are now mine." He stepped closer, his gray eyes searching her face. "I owe you my life, Evelyn. I will give you anything you want. A new identity, a fortune that will ensure you and Leo never have to worry about anything ever again. You can walk away, be free of this world." Her heart, which she had guarded for so long, felt a tremor. Walking away was the smart choice, the safe choice. Go back to being invisible. But she looked at this formidable, complicated man, a man who had shown her a fierce loyalty and a chilling ruthlessness, and she realized the life she had known was gone forever. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. "And what if I don't want to walk away?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. A slow smile touched Aleandro's lips. It transformed his face, erasing the last shadows of his illness. He reached out his hand, gently cupping her jaw. His touch was warm, electric. "Then you stay," he said, his voice a low murmur. "This is my kingdom. But a king is nothing without his queen. Stay, Evelyn, and we will reign together." She didn't have to choose between safety and power. With him, she could have both. She had walked into the lion's den to save a dying man, and in doing so, had found her own strength, her own power, her own throne. She leaned into his touch, her choice made. The ghost had been healed, but it was Evelyn Reed who had truly been reborn. The weeks that followed were a fragile, sunlit peace. The ghosts of the past, both his and hers, seemed to recede, banished by the normally they tentatively built within the gilded cage of the penthouse. Aleandro, for the first time in his adult life, learned what it was to simply be. He watched as Leo, a bright, fearless boy, accepted him, with the uncomplicated trust of a child slowly transitioning from calling him Mr. Bellini to a shyly mumbled Sandro. He would find himself pausing meetings about shipping routes and territory disputes to watch Evelyn help Leo with his homework. Her brow furrowed in concentration over a math problem, and a profound protective calm would settle over him. She was the anchor in his storm-tossed world. For Evelyn, the quiet was a luxury she hadn't realized she'd been starved of. The constant low-grade fear that had been her companion for 5 years had vanished, replaced by the formidable security of Alessandro's protection. She was no longer just a survivor. She was beginning to feel like a person again. She found herself laughing a sound she had thought lost to her at Aleandro's dry wit. She discovered the man beneath the Mafia boss, a man who had an encyclopedic knowledge of Renaissance art and a surprising weakness for the chocolate chip cookies she baked with Leo. In these quiet moments, his promise that they would reign together felt less like a strategic alliance and more like the foundation of a life. But a crown, she was about to learn, is not a soft thing. It is forged in fire and heavy with the weight of enemies. The peace shattered on a Tuesday morning. Marco arrived for their daily strategy meeting not with his usual stoic calm, but with a thunderous expression, a tablet held in his hand like a weapon. "We have a problem," he said, placing it on the large mahogany table in Alexandro's study. Evelyn, who now sat in on all high-level meetings, leaned forward. On the screen was the homepage of a major international news outlet. The headline was a dagger: "Corporate espionage or miracle cure. Whistleblower accuses rogue scientists of stealing billions in research from Janssen Pharmaceutical." Below it was a picture of her, not a recent one, but a professional hedge shot from her university days, making her look young, ambitious, and naive. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, an anonymous source from within. Jensen claimed that Dr. Evelyn Reed was a disgraced researcher who had been fired for professional misconduct years ago. It alleged that she had stolen proprietary data on a revolutionary neuroregenerative compound, their compound, and used it to con the reclusive and recently ill billionaire Alessandro Bellini into giving her protection and funding. It painted her as a fraud, a thief, and a manipulator. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. "Alistair Finch," she whispered, recognizing the venom the specific corporate language used to discredit and destroy. "It gets worse," Marco said, grimly swiping to another screen. It was an internal report. "Over the last 12 hours, 3 of our largest shipping terminals have been frozen. Coordinated surprise inspections from OSHA, the FDA, and the EPA. They're tying up our legitimate businesses in so much red tape. We'll be bleeding money for months." Aleandro's eyes, which had been warm moments before, turned to cold gray stones. He looked at the 2 reports, the public attack and the silent economic one. This isn't Falcone's work. He's a butcher. This is precise. This is surgical. This is Jensen. Evelyn said, her voice shaking with a cold rage. "This is how they fight. They don't send thugs with guns. They send lawyers and PR firms and lobbyists. They're not trying to kill me. They're trying to erase me. If they can legally discredit me, they can claim all the research, David's work, my work, as their own. They can reclaim their stolen property, and tying up my businesses puts pressure on me to cut my losses." Alessandro continued, the pieces clicking into place. "They think they can isolate you, make you more trouble than you're worth, and force me to hand you over." Marco looked at Alessandro, awaiting the order to make people disappear. But Alessandro was looking at Evelyn, watching, as the shock on her face was replaced by a look of hard, calculating fury. The woman who had faced down his traitorous cousin in her lab was reemerging. "They've made 2 mistakes," Evelyn said, her voice low and steady. She stood up and began to pace the room, her mind, her greatest weapon, now fully engaged in the war. "First, they assumed you would fold under financial pressure. They don't know you." She glanced at Aleandro, a flicker of their new unspoken bond passing between them. "And the second mistake?" he asked, intrigued. "They assumed I would be on the defensive. They think I'm just a scientist, a victim. They wrote the narrative, and they expect me to hide from it. She stopped pacing and turned to face them, her eyes blazing. But they forgot one thing. When I had your team crack their servers to find the antidote, I didn't just get David's research. I got everything. I have every dirty secret, every illegal human trial, every bribed politician, every hushed-up death for the last 20 years. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Aleandro's face. He looked at her not just with affection, but with the profound respect a king gives to his queen. She was not a liability. She was his sharpest sword. They launched the first missile in a war of information, Evelyn declared, her voice ringing with newfound authority. So we will fire back. Not with a whisper, but with a hurricane. She turned to Marco. Get the tech team ready. I'm not going after the company. I'm going after the man, Alistair Finch. I want you to find every piece of offshore data, every hidden account, every private communication he has had regarding their non-sanctioned operations in South America. She knew from David's old notes that Finch had a pet project there, one that was highly illegal and buried so deep it was never meant to see the light of day. They want to paint me as a rogue scientist, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a near growl. Fine. I'll show the world what a real monster looks like. This was her first decree. It was not a request for protection, but an order for an attack. Alessandro Bellini watched her, his heart swelling with a fierce pride. He had asked her to reign with him, and right now she was not just standing beside the throne. She was claiming it. And so the single mom who was supposed to be a victim became a queen, and the dying mafia boss who was supposed to be a memory was reborn as a king. Their story is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't a bullet or a poison, but the unshakable will of a person with nothing left to lose. But their war is far from over. Dante Falcone is still out there, and the corporate snakes at Jensen Pharmaceutical won't forget who brought them down. Alessandro and Evelyn saved each other, but can they save their newfound empire from the enemies gathering at their gates? What did you think of Evelyn's bravery and Alessandro's transformation? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this gripping tale of danger and romance, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Thank you for listening.